Hi, Ryan.
Hi, Rachel.
How are you?
Oh, I am excited. How about yourself?
I'm very excited as well.
What are you excited about?
Well, it's my birthday.
It is your birthday. We are recording this on your birthday. Surprise! Rachel's birthday, everyone. How old are you now, Rachel? Old enough to tell?
I guess 30 today.
How many in yum years?
Well, how does that convert?
It's not like dog years, but
No.
it's not like cat years. It's somewhere in between. How old would you say you are in yum years?
I don't know. I think you're the expert on yum yum, so I think it's up to you.
It's 69, but because that's ultimately yum, dinner for two. But other than being silly, we like to talk about things here on the podcast.
Yeah, we do.
And we like to talk about science fiction television primarily, although one day we hope to do Desperate Housewives,
Yeah.
the ultimate science fiction television series, Desperate Housewives. Isn't that right, Rachel?
Well, I haven't seen all of it, so I don't know.
I have seen all of it, and I know that there's a time jump in that series where they had to make future technology
You have explained that, and I don't know if it counts.
It
but
does.
That's not why we're here today.
No, we are doing something special. We did this very recently with someone else, but we're having a sit down, a talk, and an interview with a cast member from a television series that we have gone through. We did Space Above and Beyond, a cult classic 90s sci-fi series that everyone, you should go out and give a watch for yourself. It's available out there on the internet. You can give it a watch, but we are talking to one of the main cast members of that series, the man who played Wang himself, Joel de la Fuente. Hello, Joel. How are you doing?
Hey guys, it's great to be here. I'm doing well.
It's a pleasure to have you. It's just so bizarre for us to be able to sit down and talk and converse with people that are involved in the shows that we have broken apart because we like talking about TV, but we don't think too much about, I wonder if the cast members will hear us talk about if they're sexy or not.
Well, for me, I think it was really amazing because it's great that you weren't thinking about that because when I stumbled across it, when I stumbled across your podcast, it was amazing to hear the two of you talk about something that I worked so closely on such a long time ago and to do so specifically and thoughtfully. I've never experienced people going over a show episode by episode and then to do it in a way that was insightful and candid on your parts. It's what I appreciated was you spoke about what worked for you, what didn't work for you, how you saw things working, what you thought didn't work. I really appreciated it. And, it's much easier to have an objective viewpoint 30 years later. So, when people talk about what didn't work, I'm like, I don't think that worked either, actually, 30 years later thinking about it. So it was fun to be a fly on the wall and also a great way for me to re-experience the show. And a lot of my colleagues felt the same way, as you know. A bunch of the folks from the show listened to all part of the podcast. And I think for all of us, it was a great experience of a great way to have a new relationship to something that was really close, really important for all of us.
I mean, there might have been a kick too out of with our show. One of us had seen Space before, and one of us, Rachel, hadn't seen it before. And you get to have, as someone who created this series, part of the creation of this series all those years ago, you get to be along for the journey of someone going through it with fresh eyes, someone who wasn't there back in the day, someone who doesn't have the nostalgia, someone who can have that criticism of a first-time watcher being like, why am I watching this? A lot of Rachel, you're like, what are we doing here? What, you were saying Wang's a character in this show? The pilot didn't demonstrate that to me.
Yeah, me neither, Rachel. But but yeah, no, that was fun. It was really fun also because, you're so right, Ryan, because, you're talking about like an episode that's coming up and just this feeling of, wow, she has no idea that this is going to happen. I'm so curious whether it works or doesn't work. And then, of course, the season finale, like this feeling of like, how's she going to respond to, because things happen in a hurry, like at the end of that season. And also, I was really impressed with how many times you would, when you would ask, what do you think is going to happen in the next episode? It's called this. And then you would come up with 3 or 4 things, and I'd be like, wow, that's pretty close, actually. A couple of them were like in the ballpark. I would have no idea. I just thought that's really impressive.
The only time I had to withhold a title until after the guess was choice or chance, because it's like, oh, the silicates are involved.
Yeah.
It's like one of the few titles that gives it away. Unlike Ray Butts, which is like, what's a Ray Butts?
I know that was seeing that script for the first time. I just remember there was a lot of joy about that script because, and just a lot of speculation of who can play this guy. Who are they going to get to play this guy? And then when Steve showed up, we were like, is he that guy? How could he possibly be that guy? And then we started, and it was just a blast. It was great, and Steve was fantastic.
Oh, we'll talk about some of those guest stars and people, but let's rewind it a bit. Could you tell us a little about your beginnings, where you fell in love with acting? Were you someone that did it when you were a kid? Are you a theater guy? Were you someone that you hit your 20s and you're like, I want to do this acting thing? How did you fall in love with the craft?
Well, I was a theater guy in the sense that I always loved going to the theater. My parents would take us to see plays in the city anytime we were in school, and there would be a field trip somewhere. I always just loved it. I thought that the theater was a magical place, and when the lights went down and on the house, and then the lights went up on stage, it just seemed like a whole other world, and I was riveted by it. But I never thought that was something that I could do. One, just because it just seemed like a whole other world. And 2, I never really saw anybody that looked like me up on stage. And oftentimes, like when I would see someone that looked like me on television or in film, I often didn't love the representation, although I didn't have the language for it at the time as a kid. I do remember, being, I don't know, like 7 or 8 or 9 years old and seeing Arnold on Happy Days, which was the #1 show in the United States at the time. And what I loved so much about seeing Pat Morita in that show was he was just a character in the world that spoke like everybody else spoke and owned the restaurant that they all hung out in. And I just I remember just thinking how meaningful that was for me without really having the language for it or being able to sort of categorize it in a way that I understood. And then when I saw George in Star Trek, of course, just the fact that he was a part of this magic world that I thought was so cool, and he looked like me, and he sounded like everybody else sounded, and somewhere that lodged in my brain. And I think that years and years later, when I wanted to sort of do this for a living, it was a huge sort of component of that so much of wanting to be an actor is about wanting to tell stories, but also wanting to do it with a level of skill that shows other people that that somebody that looks like me is a part of this community, part of an acting community, part of this country, part of this culture, and to do so in a way that isn't just one single way, but by able to be as good an actor as you can be, to transform and play different people, that you represent yourself in that way. Because I think that if I had all the same characteristics, but wasn't, Asian American, like if I'd grown up in the Philippines or something, where my parents grew up, I think I might have done what they did. I might have been a physician, because they both, as I learned later, were performed when they were younger. And then they went into medicine. And I think part of the performance aspect of it for me was wanting to sort of have some pride and representation in representing Asian Americans.
So I'm going to ask a question, but I'm going to ask it hopefully in a slightly different way, which is there's lots of ways to judge and quantify your first role or early role. But when you think back on your career, what do you consider to be your first role?
Well, I think the first big job that I had was in the theater, which was in Two Gentlemen of Verona and Shakespeare in the Park in New York City. But then right after that, I think my first big job on film or television was Space. I had done a couple of television shows before then, but certainly I was never a series regular before. In fact, it would be decades after Space Above and Beyond when I was a series regular. Again, there was a whole journey in between the first time I did that and then the next time I did that. Oh, and also happy birthday.
Thank you.
Stop everything just to say that's thank you for spending some of your birthday talking
My
about
pleasure.
Space Above and Beyond. That's if a year ago someone had said, "Hey, guess how you're going to be spending your 30th birthday?" You might have been like, "No way!" But very grateful that you're doing that.
Yeah, it's interesting to consider because I've done some acting stuff too, and it's like you know you do your little productions, but like what's that early role that you're like, now that's where I really got to sink some of my teeth into stuff. And with Space, it's the big television one. And how did you get involved in that? Like, how did this series come your way, and what was it that lured you in about it?
It's just an audition like any other audition at the time. You know, just went in. I auditioned from New York, and I think most of the people, I think all of the people that ended up doing the show were cast out of Los Angeles. But me and one other, you know, there's an actor, Fred Weller. I don't know if you know Fred, but Fred and I went to go test out in LA, like the New York actors would go. Back then, they would, you know, audition in New York and Los Angeles for big stuff. And then usually everything was centered in Los Angeles. So then in order to get network approval, you'd get flown from New York to Los Angeles. They put you up in a hotel. You'd go in and you'd work with the creators, and then you'd go and do your audition in front of a room full of very unfriendly, dry network executives. And there was always like a New York chip on your shoulder sort of a thing. Like you'd go out and be like, "We got this," you know, like we're totally going to get this over the LA people, you know, and stuff like that. And, you know, I just remember flying out there and just having this feeling of like, not really knowing what this whole thing was about, you know, like being a little bit separated from the sort of import of it. Like you know, it was a really big deal. It was a 2-hour pilot. It was, you know, potentially a movie of the week, but there was Fox was putting all this money into it. It was the X-Files guys. And I just think all of this stuff was really palpable in Los Angeles in a way that it wasn't quite as palpable in New York. And so I think fortunately we were spared a little bit of the nerves that come with that. And so we just sort of went in and did our thing. And, you know, as Rachel has noted, there wasn't all that much for Wang and Damphus to do in the pilot. So, in fact, our audition material was basically that scene where Lee Ermey yells at everybody. And both Wang and Damphus's lines were just every line of every person that wasn't Lee Ermey. Because there weren't enough lines to sort of audition for anything. So we were basically this amalgamation of all these different characters to present to the suits or whatever. So,
wow.
Again, in a way that was sort of fortunate, I guess, there weren't a lot of expectations for Wang and Damphus. You know, there wasn't much of a character. There wasn't much of anything. So it was much easier for us, you know, to sort of get cast. There weren't 50 people they were choosing between them, narrowed down to 8, narrowed down to 6 that were all going in front of the suits. In my case, I think there was 1 or 2 other people. And also the expectations from the suits were, well, we'll just find somebody really fast, and they didn't really think too much about it. So, I was spared like I think a much higher level of scrutiny, which, you know, it was a little bit easier for me, I think.
Yeah, because when we were going through the pilot, it was a little surprise. Like, oh, by the way, Wang's a character in this show. He's going to be in the series, in case you didn't recognize that he was there. But he does have some stuff early on that, you know, we can connect with. Like, he's the funny guy in the group. It's like you and Pags are the funny guys, the layabouts, and then Pags dies. R.I.P. Pags. We all should toast to Pags. But for yourself as a performer, what was the elements of this character that you did connect with, or you did you did get early on to help you draw from with Wang as a person?
You know, I think when I look back on it now, I have the whole story. You know, like I see how it all came together and the process from beginning to end. And every year, honestly, I have a tremendous amount of gratitude for this job, you know, and a tremendous amount of affection and respect for all the people that work together on this. But in the moment, honestly, back then, we were all sort of scrapping for our lives. It was everybody's first time being a series regular on a show. Nobody had real life experience being primary storytellers on a television show before as actors. And, over the years, I've learned it requires a lot of knowledge and skill. You just get better and better at it if you're lucky enough to have more and more opportunities to do it. It's a crazy thing because you need experience to get better, but it's very hard to get the experience. And so all of us, it wasn't like we were coming in. It wasn't like I was coming in and there were, 3 or 4 people that were experts, had done a million other shows before. And so you're learning from them. We were all learning together, like as we went along. And one of the huge things about learning, this is what's so interesting about the show and what you guys have talked about at length are how the different roles evolved as the season went on. And the challenges there were a little different. Like for Lanai and I, and also James and Tucker to an extent too, all of those characters were developed after the pilot. They knew that they were going to use James in a very specific capacity, but nobody knew that James was frickin' Steve McQueen, and once he got in front of the camera, we knew that he was great, but everybody knew he was great the second he started speaking, right? And the audiences everywhere, that's all anybody wanted to talk about was, who is that guy? Who is that guy? So then that sort of evolved. That sort of made it sort of it was unanimous, with all those of us that were watching and those of us, the actors on set, but also the suits that were watching and the audiences, it just became really clear that James was going to have a lot more to do on the show. So that was exciting for everybody, but it was also very clear cut for people and for Tucker showed up and as you've pointed out very astutely, he was very, one of my friends who's an actor referred to this the other day, said it's like you're laying pipe kind of a role. You're just very functional. McQueen needs someone to push up against. Well, this guy, who is this guy? Well, we'll get this guy, and it was Tucker. But in the act of pushing up against Tucker had so much to offer, and there was so much that happened between them that then he gradually became more and more. And the fact that Tucker plays the guitar, which is so unusual, the fact that Tucker has lived a life, that's really, that was specific and deeper than anybody ever would have imagined Ross to be. He brought all of this there, and he was very articulate and available to share it. And so that was gold for Glenn and Jim. And so that happened. For Lanai and I, they were always trying to find things for us to do. And to their credit, they really did try to find things for us to do. And part of, we were joking a bit about exposition, but Wang became someone that was smart because enough times people didn't want to say certain things. And so then I ended up having to say it, so-and-so maybe can't say it because there's too many lines. It's too much and it doesn't work in this moment, or they're forgetting the lines on that day. So then I get those lines, because out of, just the circumstance of the day. So then I get it the next time. And then, well, we have to get this information in here somehow. Well, Joel did it before. Joel can sort of learn that sort of quickly. So, for 10 years on SVU, I made a living laying pipe on SVU, not because of the acting ability that I learned in acting school, but because I possessed a skill that I continued to develop that was laying pipe, which is a slightly specific and separate category of acting that people don't really pay enough attention to. People just sort of say, well, we'll just get some guy that comes in and says this, that, or the other. But I don't think people understand how hard that it is to do that, especially in the environment of a television set, because invariably someone will come in, if Tucker was laying pipe, for the scene or whatever, you come in, Tucker is a very experienced and talented actor. Yes, he's talented, and yes, he has all this, but he's also super experienced. So he came in and knew how to do it. But if you come in on a show and then, you're standing with Chris Maloney or Mariska Hargitay for the first time, and you're a little bit and then everyone just starts going like a well-oiled machine, and you're the one that has all the heavy dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
Maloney's just looking at you going, where was it? How much was it? Can you find it? And in between those things, you're like, well, we triangulated the cell phone towers and we were able to find the signal on 53rd Street at 8th. And then we went down and you're trying, and then so you just try to learn your lines. You're super nervous. People come in at the last second. They just start rolling on you. And they're like, oh, by the way, here, carry this. You're going to start walking down the hallway. This person's going to stop. You go under the thing. And all the while you're supposed to give those lines. Go.
Yeah.
And
it's a very tricky stuff to do, because you have to make it feel real. You have to make it feel not just you're reading from a script and with very technical dialogue. Like with a science fiction series, it's called, like, we call it technobabble a lot. It's like Star Trek is like technobabble up the wazoo, and there's a rhythm to it. There's a cadence you have to do with it as well. And when you're a young and upcoming actor, it may be overwhelming for some people, because it's like, how do I explain how the silicates got created? I have to use all of these sci-fi terms that aren't real to me. And you have to imbue it with something honest. And one of the things that we were actually talking about last night when we were prepping for questions, Rachel, you can go over this in detail, but we were noting, like, this is a series, like, this is the first season of a show, but it's a series with a lot of people that were up and coming, or people that were just getting their legs in this particular type of storytelling or network TV. Rachel, how would you go about it? You were talking about it last night a bit.
Yeah. How did we end up?
Well, it was mainly about, like, do you think that...
Yeah, like, I guess I was just interested because you've and James talked about how you're still close with a lot of the cast from Space Above and Beyond. And I was wondering if the fact that you were all relatively new to your roles in different ways, like the writers had written before, but they hadn't had their own show, and you'd acted before, but you hadn't been a series regular, and everybody was sort of in that same boat of like, oh, fuck, it's our first time. And if that, like, helped bring you together more, and how that sort of made for a different experience doing Space as well.
Yeah, I think it's two factors. One, that when it was so many of our first experience doing something like this. And then two, that it shot in Australia, the pilot. So those two things together basically created the environment. We were the 58th. I mean, we were thrust into the situation. We did get to know each other in boot camp. We did get to know each other trying to fight these aliens for the first time. Like, we didn't know any of it. Like, we didn't know what the chigs were going to look like. We would show up on set and we were like, what? And that was really, it was real. Like Pete Kent, who played Pags, we got so close, because he was from there and he was such a great host and we spent so much time together. And, had we shot it in LA, most of the cast was from LA. So they would have gone home, back to their families, back to their friends, back to their social circles. And there would have been a comfort and an ability to maintain their identity. But the fact that we all as a group ended up in a place that nobody knew, nobody had ever been before, so we got close, really close. And, as challenging as it could be, and through thick and thin, and the challenges that any cast has when you're working on a first-time show with really long hours and lots of pressure and stuff, we really did become a family.
Shooting in Australia, that is one of the things that we wanted to talk about, because we could tell immediately as soon as the pilot opens, like, that's Australian landscape. That house is on this slanted hill and it's got this type of deck. It's this, all the sand and the dirt and all of that. And hey, look, it's Bill Hunter, famous Australian actor, Bill Hunter, playing the Secretary General of the UN. And I was just wanting to know, are there any fun little stories about your time down here that you could tell us about? Any memories of down here in Australia?
I mean, the other thing too is we weren't in Sydney and we weren't in Melbourne. We were at Surfers Paradise. We were in just north of Brisbane, north or south of Brisbane, but on the coast there. And it was a brand new studio. And we basically would just spend all of our free time just walking up and down the beach there. Only Rodney was the only person that surfed in Surfers Paradise. So maybe Morgan did a little bit, but the rest of us, we were just like, Lanai and Rodney and I would spend so much money at the arcade. We would just hang out at the arcade, like playing games and going to Sushi Train, like having sushi all the time. And it was just beautiful. There was a time we all had time off together. We rented a car. It was Morgan and Kristen and Lanai and I. Did Rodney go? I think Rodney went, and we basically just drove. We just drove up the coast for a little while. Just had a great time together. I mean, that's what I'm talking. I mean, it's like we got apartments. They had us up in a hotel, but it just wasn't conducive to living there for weeks, being in a hotel. So we got these apartments in a building that was basically nobody else lived there except for us. I mean, and so we basically had this great experience where we were living together in Australia together. And it's just, what's there to really say about it? The people are so friendly. The weather was gorgeous where we were. Every day was an adventure.
Were you, with that pilot being done in Australia, were you expecting to film the series in Australia? Obviously, it didn't happen that way, but there was, in that period of time, Australia was like a filming location for a bunch of things like movies and shows. And have you ever been back down here just for pleasure or for any other projects over the years?
I never have, but I absolutely would love to go. The expectation was we would be going to shoot the series there, so it was with a great deal of apprehension is the wrong word, but there was excitement, but also a little fear that when you sign your contract, you're signing like a 6.5, 7-year contract to go wherever the show's going to go, and they're saying if this goes to series, we're shooting it in Australia. And I just started a relationship at the time, and we just sort of thought, well, I don't think we're going to be able to survive a move to Australia. Like if we're apart, it's just too far away. But then at the last second, they ended up shooting it in Los Angeles because it was too far. It was too far for the dailies. It was too far for all of that stuff. So all the sort of cost savings they thought they were going to be having by shooting in Australia were going to be mitigated by all the back and forth that was going to be required in sort of a non-internet friendly world at the time. There was no internet really to speak of. So you couldn't, you were going to have to like overnight the dailies and stuff like that. So it just was not doable.
No. Yeah, it was weird watching that pilot because like Ryan had warned me, but I was just like, there are so many things that are just really telling about it.
No, it's Mars, Rachel.
And
it's Mars. Can't you tell? It's red. Can't you tell?
No, like I just had like that flash of Nathan's house, and I was just like, "This."
Your brother's place. Yeah, there were some places. Or
Nope.
Oh, Nathan West's house, but
Nathan
also your brother is Nathan, who has a house like that. So there you go.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, that's true. Also, all the Angry Angels look like tradies.
Yeah.
Surfers. Oh,
yeah,
man.
and it's just like they clearly did local casting for a lot of the roles.
You have to.
Yeah.
Only the special ones like the main cast and Ali Ermi get to be a part of stuff.
I guess I'm really curious. Like you've mentioned that there wasn't a lot to Wang to start with. And I wonder how much input you got to have on how that characterization was built outside of them giving you all of the exposition because you could do it.
I think that there was a dialogue often between the actors and Glenn and Jim. I wouldn't say that it was actual input because there was never any question that they were the writers of the show and they were determining what was going to happen. We would often sort of suggest things, but really the things that they would take from us weren't things that were suggested. They were things that they would observe. So, or things that you wouldn't anticipate. So part of the reason why Wang became such a huge sports fan is because, Glenn is a huge San Diego sports fan. And so one of the first things we were talking about personally was me being from Chicago, and how much I loved Chicago sports teams. And so we would sort of bemoan the misfortunes of our sports teams together. And that's something that Glenn really seized on right away for Wang. And so he made Wang from Chicago. He made Wang a Bears fan. He made Wang, and so some of that was me being from Chicago and a Bears fan, but the things coming out of my mouth were Glenn being a Chargers fan from San Diego and his frustrations with that was coming through Wang, and so, and so for a while it did become, he could be funny and a sports fan and all this kind of a thing. And I really appreciated having more to do, but it was hard for me sometimes to sort of put on different hats and see, because watching it as I was listening to your podcast, sometimes, watching myself try to put certain things on to varying levels of success and failure, even 30 years later, I'm like, ooh, Joel, or, take a little bit more time there, or maybe you could have embraced that a little more fully, things like that. And, but you could really see how, Glenn and Jim are sort of having, it's almost like try this outfit on. Okay, that work. The shirt works, the pants don't work. So give him some more pants, and then you get something else to do, pants or exposition or something, right? Okay, the pants, he'll always wear those pants, but now let's give him something else. So, that was happening all the time, and like you said, for someone like Wang, who didn't have much to begin with, you're watching this sort of evolution happen. For characters who did have a lot to do, like, for Morgan and Kristen and Rodney, it's easy to say, oh, Lanai and I don't have much to do, this is, boohoo for us. This is hard for us to do. But it was equally hard in a completely different way. I mean, Morgan is the great example, but like for Morgan and Kristen and Rodney, which is that Morgan was really saddled with this archetype that didn't work from the get-go. Like it didn't 100% work because you're basing an archetype that's from the 1940s and 50s into the 1990s. And there's just a lot of, it's familiar enough where we sort of know what's happening, but it just isn't working in the time. And so he had to honor that, but then he had to survive it long enough to try to find his own way. And, I think that Morgan was 100%, Morgan is a wonderful actor and he was 100% committed. He was frustrated, but he was going to see it through. And to their credit, Glenn and Jim also knew it wasn't working completely. So they were constantly trying to find the right mix. And so basically that's what we were doing for, everyone's sort of juggling 12 plates at once, and Glenn and Jim's plates are the biggest plates of all, but, the actors are sort of trying to help them juggle those plates. And so everyone, there's all of this sort of, everyone's sort of scrambling, trying to adjust their processes. Sometimes we run into each other and plates go flying, but every once in a while, something really amazing starts to happen. And as the season goes on, there is more confidence in what people are doing. And I think we sort of settled into a nice rhythm. As you've also talked about a little bit, I think one of the really frustrating things is we never really found anything great to do for Lanai, and Lanai's, as great as an actor as anybody on the show. So
because
for me, it was really fun to watch her.
We love her as a presence. We love her as a presence, and we loved her bouncing off of each one of the cast. And that's like one of the draws of this series, that once you start watching it, because when Space Above and Beyond gets talked about, it's in relation to it's this cancelled show, it's created by these people, it does this in the sci-fi TV landscape, it does this in terms of like where TV was at with continuity and ongoing stories. But when you actually sit down and watch it, it's about the ensemble. It's about those group of characters having to learn to like each other or grow to appreciate each other as a platoon, as a unit, as a squadron, commanding officers and subordinates. And you can definitely see that with all of you in the cast. There's just such a warm energy from you all. And yet, as you're saying, like, you're having to juggle stuff, and each actor's having to play very specific types of characters. And for you looking back on it, or just thinking back on the experience, how would you describe working with the cast, like with the other people? Like, how did you feel about it? Like, who did you feel like you as an actor really gelled with, or who do you think like Wang as a character really got something brought out of him by interacting with this person?
I mean, if you name the actor, I could talk about them all at great length, because I'm super fond of everybody. I have a lot of great respect for each person, and different things for different people. But, I was just texting Rodney the other day, like we were going back and forth, and just the fact that we're still having these conversations, like the fact that, he was texting me about a friend of mine, whose work that he admires. And so we were texting about that, and it's just sort of like, we used to still have a community where you can be like, hey, what do you think? I was watching your friend's work and I think this, and you'd be like, oh, that's so nice that you would say that. We have that sort of fraternal bond in that respect. Like I'm so interested to hear what he has to say about things. As somebody who I was really close to during the shooting of it, who I'm not really in touch with anymore, was Doug Hutchison, who plays Elroy L, because of the fact that we had such a sort of this perversely intimate relationship, like this sort of, which I loved so much, because at the end of the day, the fact that Glenn and Jim were so ultimately interested in a character piece, in an ensemble piece, that character was where their passion was to everybody's great benefit, because you're getting really complicated, bizarre things to do. Like, it's one thing if if you describe it, it's like, oh yeah, this one character is tortured by this other character, and there are these things that come up that are, it's like a military show, so there's all these things that come up. But it was so much more than that. It was weirdly intimate. It was, and Doug, of course, is so great at bringing that dark sort of pseudo sexual yet also playful, and it's like whatever you don't expect. Like when I was watching, I was The Angriest Angel, I think, right? Well, I watched it, because I was listening to the podcast, and there's that one moment where he says, oh yeah, Oxenfree, and he has this moment where he like throws up his hands and he sticks his tongue out. He was that Elroy, that particular Elroy was a tongue sticker outer, and I was laughing so hard watching this, like 30 years later, because I was like, Doug, you crazy fucker, just because, like, where did you get that? Like, it's classic weird Doug, and Doug is just doing his thing. And of course, we were all like titillated and scared when we heard that Doug was doing it, because he was elevated in our eyes because Glenn and Jim had worked with him on the X-Files. And so we were hearing all of these stories about him and what he was like on the X-Files. So he came in with a little bit of cachet, the way that David Duchovny showed up, and people that they had worked with before, we sort of, received them as, friends of Glenn and Jim. And so they had like a little aura about them. And, Doug had this whole aura when he was playing, I think his character was called Toombs on the X-Files.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
he was sort of method about it.
He's one of the best villains in the first stretch of the show. So it's like an obvious pull to bring him into Space Above and Beyond to play arguably one of the great villains of the show.
Yeah, he sent the actors like a cow heart or something like that, which really freaked out the cast members of the X-Files, I think. And so we heard stories like that, and we're like, "Ugh, this guy's gonna be so weird. That guy's going to be like pointing a finger in my face and who knows where else, And so all of that sort of played into things. So
yeah, he was great. I love how in Angriest Angel, his version of Elroy L is more insane than the one who tortures you. The one who tortures you is relatively calm in comparison to that one for some reason. But it's like,
yeah, isn't that great? Like the way he was able to find slightly different versions of this archetypal Elroy character. That was really fun, and at the time it's like we're all juggling so much. So it's fun to have some distance where you can start to appreciate the breadth or just even what people are going for more. Like strangely, when you're working on a show, you know it more than anybody else in the world until it airs. And then suddenly you go from being the expert to like the least important person in the room, because the people that watch it bring a whole new perspective to it. They have their own opinions, and suddenly all the expertise that we had is dwarfed by the viewers, and so it's just, and it's fun to watch it as a viewer all these years later, because you see things that you would never see. Sometimes when I watch the show, I am just thinking of and remembering, I can remember other takes. Like you'll be watching, it's 30 years later, I'll be watching, I'm like, oh, they should have used this other take. And I sort of think to myself, I can't believe 30 years later, I remember other takes of this shot in this cut together show. But that's what it's like to work on a show.
It's for a series that's so macabre and so like morose. Your character has to really help bring some levity to the group, not just for comedic effect, but just your brotherly bond with a lot of the people. Like you and Rodney have a real like brother bond, but you're like the older brother to him. And then when you're interacting with McQueen, it's like you're kind of like you're like the bratty kid who's doing impressions of him, and it's like it's this thing where you have a series where lots of episodes will end with everyone crying, but to get there you have so many little fresh bits. And one of the excitements for myself doing this podcast was Rachel going through it for the first time, and what the reaction would be to some of the characters' journeys. And even for myself, I said at the very beginning, I don't even think Wang gets that much to do, because being a young teenager, I was drawn to, like, the main ones, like the big guys.
Other characters were more shiny.
Yeah, exactly. But for us on the podcast, it was just so enriching to see what Wang did get up to, like his journey throughout the show, and like how his purpose did evolve and change over the course of things. And with yourself involved in that, like with you getting the scripts each week and seeing where the character was going, what was it like for you? Like, was it exciting to see Wang go from like the guy who wore the pants of exposition to a character that would allow you to bring some real gravity of dramatic variety? Because we've had people who watched the show along with us, and one of my friends, Julio, he was like, I wasn't expecting Wang to be the Christmas Grinch, but it really works because he's still suffering from the previous episode. And it's like, many people, like, who would have guessed like this character could have that to them, and this performer could bring that? Because again, when we start the show, it's like I didn't even remember much, and Rachel didn't even know Wang was going to be followed through on that heavily. So what was it like on your end to see slowly over the course of things, the character get those different dimensions, his shades, and an overall little arc?
Well, one of the great lessons that the show gave me was seeing how all of these different pieces, as something evolves, can help create the character for you. That when you have certain things come up that might be contradictory, or you do this one week and then you do this the other week, but then all of a sudden you're getting tortured. You're supposed to tell jokes, then you're getting tortured, and then this is happening, and always a million different questions about what direction is this character going in, and nobody has an answer for you because everybody's spinning plates trying to figure it out. Looking back on it, the great lesson from that is I stumbled onto a character that was more interesting than I ever could have done by myself, and a character that was more human than anybody would have foreseen going into it. And that was the great lesson that I learned coming at it from Wang's point of view, as opposed to, say, someone coming from Nathan's point of view, which is to say, when you see Nathan's character, you have a million different stories to draw from, and you think you have a beginning, middle, and end. You have all these expectations. And even if you serve those, a lot of the time it's like, well, I knew that was going to happen. That's boring. And with this, when you don't know where it's going and you're complaining because it doesn't make sense, or I don't like what I'm doing, or I have no idea, or you don't trust me, or this is how, because all that is going on while we're spinning plates and being grateful and having a great time. We're also scared, frustrated, not sure what's going on, fighting like a family fights. But then you look back later and you're like, people don't always make sense. People don't make logical sense all the time. People go this way and then they go that way. The person that was in such a good mood was the meanest person at the table today. And that makes a layered, interesting character. And that was a great lesson of Space. That, when you watch how the characters sort of find their way through, and specifically for me, for Wang, I feel like Wang was a great gift because he was a character that nobody would have been able to create on their own. And I'm not saying that the character was 100% successful or was this or that, but when I look at all of the different things that sort of splat out on the canvas at the end of the day, it certainly is a lot more interesting than any of us would have done on our own, I think. And that taught me a lot. Like, we don't always have to be so logical about things, or sometimes we need to embrace the opposites, or really go for things that don't make logical sense if they're emotionally true, because you end up creating really compelling characters that way.
Yeah, I think that can make a really big difference between feeling like there is a character and there is a person in a show, is when those complexities come through, and not everything is in alignment because people aren't just equations that always work the same way or always equal out in the end, that there is more complexity than that. And Wang is a very dynamic character that does evolve. So I'm wondering if there is a specific moment that you feel like sums up Wang for you.
Thanks for these questions, by the way, you guys. They're such interesting questions. I think maybe this is sort of a cheat because it's at the end, but that moment when in the last episode the ISSCV door closes and then Wang goes to the door and he tries to open it and it's not going to open. And so there's a moment where he has to sort of realize a whole bunch of different things. Like one is I'm stuck and I can't get out. And two, there's an objective to fulfill. And three, we're all in danger. So he makes this choice to sort of sacrifice himself for the good of the mission. And I think on paper, it's an altruistic action that's heroic. But because of the show was the way that it was, it doesn't come across as this sort of shiny heroic moment. It's not like a superhero makes that choice. It's this flawed kid, the same kid who couldn't raise his voice in the pilot, with Lee Ermey. Suddenly, like, he's the one that's saying, let's go do this. And we have the benefit of all these jagged little moments before that to inform the simple action. And I think the line is something just like he says, Nathan, take them home. I think everybody is telling Nathan, Nathan, come on, like, this is what, everybody basically gives their lives for Nathan, like for Nathan's objective, at the very beginning, we're like, Nathan, what are you doing? Like, pay attention to us, pay attention to the Marine Corps. And at the end, everybody gives their lives for Nathan, like, Nathan, take them home. This is what you want to take them home. And I think in a way that's sort of Wang in a nutshell, because he's finally a member of the group. He finally has his war cry. He finally, I think he's always wanted a family, and that's the moment where he's the closest to his family, and he's finally able to sort of save himself. All of these sort of inner demons that he's had, he's able to sort of answer in that simple action.
Yeah, and it's I always almost see it as like he is trying to redeem himself in his own eyes, at least.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. One of the things early on that really brought something out of the character of Wang for us, and I'm not too sure if this is like how you stumbled across the podcast, because we made a little video post about it, but it's that conversation that you have with your now current wife, that character in the two-parter, and that whole episode, it's like Wang is the comedy guy. He's a silly guy. He's wearing his lucky shirt and he's getting all he's just posturing about being the sports guy. But then when confronted with the real fact that this could be a mission that you don't make it back from, you get to have very intimate and quiet conversations. We get to see Wang sit down with a woman and actually talk as a person instead of like this machismo character that he himself is putting on. And that's also like what I really adored about Wang early on, was there was this sense of like he is putting on a persona because he wants to come across as more, more rough and tumble than he actually is. Like, it's funny to see you walk over to like Cooper or West or somebody and be like, hey, I need the TV. It's my time now. And I think that was just such a big moment, was we got to see like a more genuine, sweet side of Wang, a character that had vulnerabilities rather than just the guy who was there to crack wise, or the guy who was there to tell us why the problem is the problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm just sort of postulating this in the moment, but that stretch of episodes, and by that I want to say it's like, Butts, the enemy, the first double episodes going into like River of Stars, like that whole sequence of episodes. That's the bridge of episodes that takes us from the beginning, where it was a little bit, it was still sort of, we were still dealing with the aftermath of the pilot and stuff. This is when the show started to find things that worked, and then things really start working just after that, like River Stars that goes into, the next double episodes, Angriest Angel and those episodes, which I think are the as a stretch, they're our best episodes. But these ones, I think I'm just as fond, if not more fond of, like, the Butts, Level of Necessity, Choice or Chance episodes. And even, we're all really, I think we're all really fond of The Enemy and the cast. And it was so funny to hear you guys take that apart. I was like, ooh, ouch, ooh. And I think that, because we were all being given a lot of different things to do in very fast order, really high stakes stuff, like, and when it doesn't work in The Enemy, really high stakes stuff in Hostile Visit is like, we're all going to go toward death. High stakes stuff. Here's this woman that I'm having a conversation with. And, those are the pieces that, it's just them throwing these big ingredients in the pot. And I think they found the ingredients they wanted to use. And then they started refining them as we got further on into the episodes. And, as an actor personally, when I think back on that time, I think I too, like you're saying Wang was doing, I was putting on something because I wanted something more to do on the show. I was trying to find my way to make an effort or mark on the show. And I think, Glenn and Jim are giving me things here that I don't quite see as the things that are going to take me to where I need to go, because I'm busy posturing the way Wang is posturing, and they're giving me things. And while I'm playing them on the way, I don't realize that we're finding our way to something yet. You know what I mean? And so that's such a great gift coming from them that I didn't realize in the moment. I'm just sort of trying to figure out what works or want something, it's like, am I going to get yelled at again? I don't think that that's cool. I don't want my character to get yelled at. Like, why can't I be cool like Cooper? Or why can't I have like a shot of my eyeball with like the spaceship going up like Morgan? Or why can't, you know what I mean? I'm just having all these thoughts. And in fact, I'm starting to get things that are ultimately going to define who he is, and in a way, and the character that I really loved. I think I've been sort of mischaracterized or sort of quoted partially out of context at times because of how I feel about representation and being Asian American and all this stuff. Like, I love this character, like, unequivocally. Like, I love Wang. I love the experience on the show. It wasn't always a perfect show, like the feeling of it, like it wasn't always comfortable or anything like that, but I'm so grateful for it. And I think he's a great character. I mean, my issues with representation have so much to do with like that period of time where you just didn't see so many people that looked like me, and so that there was so much pressure to be a certain thing. But when you're also trying to be an actor and you want to create a compelling, interesting character, those characters are flawed, and those characters don't always make sense. And you can't play a perfect person and be a good actor. So Wang sort of was finding someone who was very flawed and getting a chance to play somebody like that. And that's that's the great gift,
Yeah, there's a lot of different things floating online and just in the general area when it comes to this series and you and some of those things. And we tried our best to talk about it during the show, but it's that thing of like, we don't have the full context of everything. We don't know. We're just going to go on good faith of some things and just go off of what the show had in it. And we tried our best, and we would talk about what we felt about the representation and how this series went about examining issues of bigotry, and did it do it well, did it not at times. And yeah, that was one of the things that we had to ask you about, was like if you wanted to clarify any more, like give a bit of an understanding for people out there, because you go to like the Wikipedia page and it'll be like criticism, and it's like one of the actors you are talking about this, and it makes it sound like you had a problem with Wang coming across as a stereotypical character. And it's like when you read that and I'm watching the show, I'm like, oh, I don't know. I can't see it, because one of the things I find interesting is, especially in this period of time, a lot of characters, whether they were played by African Americans or Asian Americans, it's like that was the thing about the character. It's like you were like, it had to be a story about that. But in Space Above and Beyond, it's a series dealing with bigotry, but the race of the characters don't factor in. Like you being
No, that's
Asian
moved
never
over to the tanks, really.
But yeah, like
Right.
Wang being the Asian guy on the team never matters. It's just like he's never brought up. Like it matters in the fact that you are just a really competent character and you're there. But it's not like we get a very special episode about Wang and stuff like you did with like Harry Kim, where Harry Kim on Voyager each week he would come in and be like, old Chinese proverb from my family is like, but Harry Kim's Korean. And the writers just admit like we didn't know.
Yeah.
But with Wang it's
So
just
bad.
like with Wang it was just like, oh, he's there, and then when you step back it's like, oh yeah, like obviously with the actor but also the character's name, but like you just like every other character there is no like special treatment about it like in some other
it really
stories.
feels like Wang was just Wang. It wasn't like, look at us, we're doing a thing. Here is an Asian American actor.
Well, I mean, okay, so to try to, rather than just say, I'm out of context there, this is how I feel about it, maybe to try to focus more on the actual criticism part, to try to understand where I was coming from. Because when I look back on the show now, or even after, when I look back when the show was completed, for example, the great gift was, look at this really interesting, compelling character that had all of these idiosyncrasies and paradoxes that make him an interesting person. Like when the show was finished, I thought he is the most interesting character in the sense that he doesn't make sense all the time. And that's really interesting. Like, you know, that's a person. And I really, I appreciated that, that uniqueness of him, you know, that it was like, you know, he's a little bit different sometimes. But if I think of who I was when I was doing the show, when I first got the show, when I was doing the pilot of the show, we didn't know how the show was going to end up. We didn't know that I was going to be given all these things to do. All I knew was what was in the pilot. And as I've tried to say sort of in a humorous way, the character was 4 different characters. Like, so there was no characters, what I'm trying to say. But who was the character in the pilot? He's a guy who's scared. He's a guy who gets yelled at and is extremely fearful, for humor. And so to me, there were a lot of red flags there for me, especially when you're about to sign a 6-year contract, where you might be doing this for 6 years. And so I was worried about it. I was like, I'm not going to be on a show where the whole point of my character, one is his name is Wang, which at the time was what I started hearing right away. Like people, it's different now, but back then it was like people thought that was funny to say it out loud. Wang, Wang, you know, and to me, like as someone growing up where you don't want to point it out that you're different, hearing people laugh at the name of a character made me worried, you know, and made me feel bad and made me feel worried for people who might have that name, who might be, Wang. Also, as it was pointed out to me many, many times going into the pilot, like the correct pronunciation of that name, if you're Chinese, is Wang, because there is no ah sound. So whenever you would say, my name is Wang, there was always somebody who is of Chinese background who would say, it should be Wang. To which point, you're put in the position of having to say, well, but it's an Americanized version and people say Wang here or something. And well, are you Chinese? No, you know, and so then you have to have that whole conversation. So if you're having that conversation and the whole point of your character is that you get yelled at and it's funny, because that's what you do when you watch that. It's the whole point, if the scene works, and I'm not saying that it works or not, but when Lee Ermey yells and basically says, you know, you're not a man, basically, and then he has people run up and yell in your face and that you yell. The whole point is that's so funny. And also his name is Wang, and that's funny. And that's who that guy is, somebody that we laugh at. Not somebody that we laugh because he's funny, because he's a sports fan or because whatever else. We laugh at him. And when I was growing up and seeing people were laughing at characters. People laughed at Long Duck Dong and 16 Candles. People laughed at the Mickey Rooney character in Breakfast at Tiffany's. You're not laughing because they're interesting, funny characters. You're laughing at the otherness of those characters. So when I say that I had an issue with stuff like that, that's what I had an issue with. And I still stand behind that. Like I didn't know who Glenn and Jim were. And when I met Glenn, he's very shy, at first. And he said, Wang isn't going to have much to do in the show, but we're really happy to have you. We'll try to find some things for you to do. But this is really a show about, it's a show about Nathan and Cooper and Vanson. And he was really upfront about it. And I was like, okay. But I'm still really worried, because if what I am is how you see me in the pilot, then this isn't really why I want to be an actor to begin with. And I think that it's problematic. So that's what I was talking about. And how it evolved, that's not how Glenn sees the world, and obviously that's not how James Wong sees the world either, as another Asian American person. So, I think what we accomplished after that was much different than that, but that's where my fear came from. Ironically, I feel like Harry Kim was not like that in the pilot. And when you talk about like the things that he was saying later, that's really unfortunate because they didn't ever have to do stuff like that. So.
Yeah, it's it was one of those things too where like just obvious thing, like when you're going through the series, those things that you mentioned about the pilot are there. And as someone who grew up with like 90s science fiction television, maybe good intent was there, but you do get like these fumbles that were very common as well. And so those concerns you're mentioning were perfectly valid and make a lot of sense. But it's that thing of like when you're like, nowadays you go to the Wikipedia and we're thinking about it from like the full series context. It's like, oh, and you see that quote and you're like, oh, what does that mean? And also just for myself, I'm like, oh, I assumed that the character of Wang was somewhat of a self-insert for one of the creators of the show because of just similar names and stuff. And also like this series does deal with issues of racial inequalities and talks about like stuff of that nature. And so it's just like I don't know, but I'm glad to be able to talk to you and hear it more fully from your side, because when we're doing the podcast, it's like I feel like we need a little bit more, and who knows, maybe you, the actor, your perspective on it is a bit different now than whenever that statement was made, or maybe you can articulate it in a way that we aren't 100% sure of.
Yeah, because especially the conversations around representation have continued to evolve quite a bit since space first came out as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's the big thing too is opportunity. I think the thing that I like to say too is when people talk about The Godfather, people talk about one of the great American films or one of the great films of all time. They don't talk about, oh my God, the way Italian people are represented, just criminals, the mob, blah 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 blah. Why? Because the person in the corner store is Italian American, or they know there's Joe DiMaggio. There's this, there's so many different ways that you're exposed to Italian Americans, Italian culture. Sure, there's a lot of negative portrayals, but there's so much out there that there's you have the chance to have like a varied picture. And now I think, obviously everything is sort of still we're sort of still figuring it all out. But when you turn on the TV now, you see so much more diversity than you used to see. So it doesn't have to be like you so succinctly put it. It's not the function of the character isn't just a race, because, and that's when that's what, because if that's who Wang ended up being like that, I was just really worried about it. I didn't want it just to be that, and I would have felt a little bit better about it, but still problematic if like Wang was just so heroic all the time, like I always say the right thing.
It's just like, okay, we're going to make him the exact opposite of the stereotype. And that's good representation because he's not the stereotype. So it's all fine.
Oh, you mean Star Trek with Chakotay? Yeah. Voyager at that time was a wild beast, and it has aged particularly. And I love Voyager, so you can take it as a fan that I have issues with. But to get back with space, as some like, this is a tough question after all of this, but Do you have a favorite episode of the show?
You mentioned the enemy.
But do you have a favorite of your own? Does it equate to you as someone being able to watch it, or someone who read the script and got to perform it, or the actual making of it? Do you have a favorite?
The last episode. I mean, so much of that episode was so. I just feel like Glenn and Jim are at the top of their game. First of all, like I just think and they really pull things together in a really nice way. I'm talking about actually first the actual written script, and then the way that it was put together was also amazing. But as you've talked about a little bit, like that's not really what we shot at the time. Like they knew that it was most likely going to be canceled, and the writing's on the wall and everything. But what's not said enough about it, like when I hear people speak about it, is even though we knew the numbers weren't good, we didn't have network support anymore, people weren't watching us because they were moving us around. My feeling is, and this is other people might disagree, but even though you say all of those things, like when Glenn says it, he's like, I knew, and then I was going to change all this. But I would say that at the same time, what Glenn doesn't say is that we all had hope. To quote Wayne, we all had faith.
Through in things in that episode of like, it just leaves like the window open a crack where it's just like, you can go back and do this thing with this character and that thing with that. And that's why like I found it so frustrating with what happens with Wang, which I'm sure that you'll get into more.
Well, the other thing I just want to say about that episode that I love so much is Shirley Walker's score in that episode. Oh, it's so good. It's so good. I mean, yes, they also ended in complete silence, which is amazing, but there's like this theme that they use that I don't know what the instrument is, but it's almost like it almost sounds like bells, that they use. Like when they're looking for Kylan's name on the list, there's like this sort of wistful, sad chiming that happens, and they use it throughout the episode, and it's so, she captures so much that sort of yearning, sad darkness with hope in it that is infused in all of the show. Like that, she sent me so kindly, because I never met Shirley in person, but I remember telling her, I sent her an email saying how much I loved her scores for that. And then she sent me cassette tapes of all of the episodes. And I had digitized them years ago. And now, of course, they were lost in the cloud when Apple started doing different things about stuff. So I'm sort of in this place where I'm thinking I don't even know if I still have the cassettes anymore. But if you ever just hear the music from that specifically the last episode, there's all these new themes and stuff. It's so good and captures our show so perfectly. Like I used to just listen to it and just think about the show.
There were a lot of interesting guest stars and directors that popped up during the series, and we love seeing certain faces, certain names, and there was some that raised eyebrows, like Coolio's in the show, but...
I remember. Yeah.
I mean, we all love Coolio. He played Quonset in Futurama that used the sound effects from Space Above and Beyond, so there's a relation there. But
is that right? Wow.
Yes, that's true. Apparently, online, who knows? It might not be. There's a few things about space trivia that aren't necessarily true to life.
I think it is just that space used very basic stock sound effects, and so does Futurama.
It's Fox's Sci-Fi sound effect library.
Yeah.
But did you like working with any particular guest stars? Were there any that you just really gelled with or thought brought a unique presence outside of Doug that you've mentioned already? And any of the directors that you thought really got the show or you just really were connecting and vibing with?
He directed, I think, more episodes than anybody else. So I think people talk about Tom Wright a lot. Tom was a great director for our show, sort of like, it's not really like Tucker, but Tom served in Vietnam, and they both experienced some pretty intense stuff, and so knew a lot about war from a firsthand experience. And so he was able to bring that to the table in a way that was, I mean, he had an authentic life experience that he was able to use in an artistic way. So that was great. And then, there's an actor turned director named Charles Martin Smith, who I really enjoyed speaking to just about acting and about directing, like when he directed an episode. And Doug, of course, was the great guest star that I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to work with a bunch. But everybody was really lovely to be around. I mean, we didn't see too much of Coolio. We were excited to see him once, but he came with an entourage. He was in his trailer for a long time, and then did his thing, and then left. So,
there was. I mean, Coolio R&R is a wild episode of television. You've got Coolio, you've got David Duchovny giving an even weirder performance than Coolio.
Yeah, which was not part of my predictions for that episode.
No.
I think we might have chatted about it, offline or whatever, but it was sort of a bummer because, David was on that show technically as a favor for Glenn and Jim. We really needed the ratings then, but then he sort of kneecapped them by saying, you can't use my name to publicize the show. So there was it didn't benefit us at all. And I don't know why you would do it and then prevent the benefit of having done it. Cause that could have really helped. Sort of a bummer.
But he came in and gave a weird performance. He's like, "Look, I'm coming in. I'm just gonna ham it up. Yep. That's what I'm gonna do." Yeah. And
whatever I'm doing it 100%.
So, Rachel, where do you want to go now? Do you want to crack open the questions about the cancellation of it all?
Oh, I thought we would go with some of the other trivia points that are floated around, which one should be relatively easy to confirm or deny, which was, did you meet your wife on set?
I did not meet my wife on set. She and I met when we started dating right when I graduated from acting school and was doing Shakespeare in the Park, and then she came to visit during the shooting of the season in LA right as they were casting that part, and so she auditioned, and we were lucky to get to play those scenes together. But we had been together for, if not quite a year, was it a year? Maybe a little more than a year when we did that, and now we've been married for 23 years.
Wow. Because that's a lovely little fairy tale story that everyone hears. It's like, oh, see these two actors that are bonding on the screen? Oh, they met during this and now they're married and they have a family. And that's...
I do enjoy seeing that. I see that floating around a lot. And I see no need to sort of publicly shoot it down, but it's not true.
And you guys had great chemistry on the screen. We wanted to see her character come back at some point. There were points in the show like she could have come back in that moment instead. But maybe if there was a season 2, we could have got her to come back and be like, still got the shirt? Still got the stinky shirt? The lucky shirt?
I wish I had that shirt.
It also says like you guys got injured during this show. Like there's a lot of stunts, there's a lot of running around, a lot of gunplay, a lot of explosions, and you and I have talked about it off the mic, but could you tell us a little bit about like the experience of making the show when it comes to all of like that physicality? Because like you were saying, there's so much to contend with coming into the series as people who are learning, but like even like some experienced actors may not be accustomed to having to be in the war zone like you guys had to be for this season.
If you ever talk to Rodney, and I'm pretty sure James probably mentioned it when he was on, but you should ask Rodney to tell the story about about how James. I don't know. I'm laughing because James broke his rib, but the story about how James broke his rib, to hear Rodney tell it is so funny. Just because also it's like Cooper like tickled to death about McQueen wanting to, because we were all in every shot. So like the idea was that there's all of these actors, so you can give actors some time off. It's like when you're having, when Vanson and Cooper are doing their thing, like we can give these guys, some time off, but it never worked out that way because they're sort of having a scene together, and Wang is like checking the radio in the back, and Danfoos is shoveling something over there. So we were basically in every scene every day together, and you get really tired. And people are literally throwing dirt in your face. They're like, action, throw dirt in your face. You know what I mean? Like, you got these helmets on. Rodney was claustrophobic, and these helmets would just fog up, and he would just, and Cooper became claustrophobic because Rodney was claustrophobic. And so on Sugar Dirt has still to this day, it's like the longest workday I've ever done. It was a 20-hour workday. And we'd been shooting all day. It ends, that day ended where we're all in the diner and we think that we're about to get killed. And McQueen walks through the door and says, you're never right, And we were so tired watching this last time. Kristen is crying like in the diner, and it was like, she's crying because she's so tired. We were so tired. And earlier that day, we had shot, all those explosions on the airfield, and the special effects guys were like kids in a candy store because they were getting to blow stuff up in the middle of nowhere. So all this gasoline, all these pellets and stuff. And, on that particular day, there was a huge fireball, and the wind shifted when we're jumping into a foxhole, and the wind blew the fireball over the hole. And I think it was me and Morgan were the closest to the blast, but everybody got burned from it. Like I got a really big burn on my neck. I think there's still a scar on there. And we thought we were on fire. Like it was really intense. And, we never had a day like that again. I think, production called us in and wanted us to tell the whole story. And we never had to do that again. And, people were falling asleep, driving home, like driving off the road and stuff like that, after these really long. I mean, that's something that's been addressed actually in the last couple of years, where they have these new rules where if you're going to be shooting a certain distance away from places, they have to put you up in a hotel because it's just too dangerous.
Yeah, that makes sense too. I mean, this is a physically taxing show. Like you have to wear these big outfits, you have to wear these big helmets where they have to, I imagine with the ones where you're on a planet, they have to put a fan in it so you have some oxygen, like some airflow in there, and who knows how good they are because those.
Well, then they have to turn the fans off when you're speaking.
Yeah.
When you're speaking, it's like they can't hear it, so they turn the fans off, and then you'd fog up,
At least you didn't have to wear the Chig outfit.
That's true. That is very true. Also, we didn't have to be Rodney in Who Monitors the Birds.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, Rodney, I think Rodney beat the 20-hour mark on more than one occasion while shooting that show. And he's in the water. He's like rolling. I mean, you name it, he's doing it. And he embraced it 100%, and he's so wonderful. He's so wonderful in that. It's such a great special episode, but it almost killed him.
Oh, yeah. That was the thing about Space is this is a one-season show. It's a canceled series. When we talk about it, you got to hear Rachel go through the journey of, I can't really get that attached because it's cancelled, to, I'm really attached and I'm upset because it's cancelled. And the thing that I really admire about it is they fit so much stuff in. Like a lot of first seasons of shows, even today, but especially back then, just kind of flounder about. Like
Space goes all in.
Yeah, like there's still rough patches, but like there's so much like adaptation to the things that need to be there. While it's like most Star Trek first seasons suck. It's just because they don't grab onto the things that work until like midway through the second season. But that's the thing that I really admire about this show is just it's like 23 episodes, and you see it just click into place after a certain point. And with its cancellation, like, how did you find out about it? Like, there was this obvious, like, as you were saying before, there was this hope that things would work out, but there was still some writing on the wall. But like, how did it come across to you? Like, what was the moment you knew that it was actually over?
I think I got a phone call from Jim Wong. I was in New York, got the phone call, but then I feel like I watched. I mean, I know I was, when the last episode aired, I was with James. I watched it in James's house. We watched it together, and I didn't know that Wang was going to go out the way that he went out. It was written as a cliffhanger, and nobody had told me. So when I watched that happen, we both were like, "What?" And we were, James was laughing about it, and I sort of was like laughing too, but I was pretty traumatized about it, because I hadn't yet had that experience of dying, like on something that I'd worked on for such a long time. And it really did feel like in the days following that someone I knew really well had unexpectedly died. It was really sad. I mean, I know it's not the same thing, but emotionally, when you work on something for a long time and all of a sudden they're gone, it really took me by surprise. It was a bummer.
They didn't call you to be like, hey,
No,
they called you to let
me.
you know it was over, but they didn't say, hey, by the way, we killed your character in the edits.
No. I think, maybe Jim had called Joel and tell him we're canceled on his list. Glenn had tell Joel that he blows up and he forgot to call me.
That's a big surprise because, in theory, it makes sense because it's like, this is a war show. We have to show the cost of it. We killed Pags in the first episode. Yeah. And so if we're going to end it, somebody or many people need to go. But with Wang, it's just as we were talking about before, like the door's closed on you, and there's just this acceptance of the thing, and you've grown so much since the first episode where you didn't have your battle cry. And Rachel, for yourself, like your first time in this, did you think that Wang was going to make it out at the end of the season? Because
I hoped, but I got the feeling that they were just like, we're going out, we're just going to cut all of these things. And Wang was on his own, done something heroic. I was like, it's prime time for killing your darlings. But I was still upset and disappointed that they did it.
Yeah. You have such a good radar for these things. I'm going to ask you for things in the future just to get your sense.
Yeah, we'll read your scripts and be like, Joel, you're going to die soon.
Should I do this or not?
Yeah, Joel.
Rachel's going to get all level of necessity on me.
Oh, yeah.
We did have a question that was like, you've ended up doing a lot of genre stuff. And we were wondering, like, is that a happenstance thing, or is it just like you've done one, so then you kind of go, people know you for that, so they're like, oh yeah, get Joel in for this?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's certainly not. I mean, I haven't thought about it that way before. It's not part of the plan or anything. I mean, I think that I would sort of characterize my career like over basically since the start of streaming as sort of a different chapter as the stuff that came before. Like, because basically I did this job called Hemlock Grove, which is a horror genre thing for Netflix. And I think that I hadn't done a job like that in many years, because I did 10 years recurring on SVU, which was sort of like a recurring supporting part. And so to play this part sort of began a process of, Hemlock Grove led to Man in the High Castle, which led to shows after that. And I think that those were more related to each other than space was. I think that the Hemlock Grove, the great gift of Hemlock Grove, I mean, and I really loved that show. I really loved working on that show. I think that the great lasting gift that it gave me was it allowed people to see me in a darker way. So it's led to a lot of, I mean, it's really funny to me when people are like, gosh, all you play are like these really scary, dark people. I think it's so funny because if you had said that to me, when I was playing Wang, who doesn't have his battle cry or whatever, and then for years and years, it's just like best friend and like, smiley guy, cause I'm smiley guy. But, nowadays it's all like, play these morally gray individuals, but
you have a good scowl going on in a lot of your IMDb pictures. It's like, there's Villain Man. Here he is with a scowl. And I think because, with me, it's like, I find it very interesting because I must admit, I've only seen the first season of The Man in the High Castle, and it was just given to me. It was like, hey, you should check this out. And I was watching the show, and it was like halfway through, I'm like, oh, that's Wang, by the way, because it's been so long, but it's just like, you're so different. Like, you're like just such a different character, and I hadn't really seen you in anything else other than space, and maybe one or two things over the years in little roles. But then I saw you in this. I'm like, oh man, and you're playing like arguably one of the best characters in the show as well. And it's just like, oh, that's Wang. He's scary in this show. He's not the nicest person in the world.
You're like, wait, this is the guy that was complaining about representation?
yeah,
playing
exactly,
the really scary, eyeglass wearing Japanese guy. Yeah, it's the same guy
with a leather coat and everything and the hat. Oh man. But yeah, I did find it interesting because like since Space, like some of your biggest roles have been like these shows that generate like a bunch of audiences. Like when you do a science fiction show, when you do a horror fantasy show, when you do like your alternative history sci-fi and your zombie shows and all that, even before the streaming age, there's more of a guarantee of like nerds like us that will exist and bug you about it than say you doing like a firefighter show, or something like that. Or I don't know how rabid the Law and Order fans are for you. I don't know. I know Law and Order has been around for a while, but I just wonder, like, have you had any particularly memorable fan interactions over the years when it comes to space?
Oh, like most of my favorite interactions are with people from space, because I think also because if people recognize me from space and they didn't like it, they just don't say anything. but if people are going to come up to you and say something about a show that was on 30 years ago, usually it's something that's really moving, and I was doing, I'm working on this Walking Dead show, and I'm in France. I'm in the countryside of France. Like I'm not in Paris. I'm at Mont Saint Michel in France. I'm going to eat at a restaurant, and the guy that's sitting is just like, oh, the show, and I'm like, oh yeah, The Walking Dead, we're shooting here, and he's like, no, not that show, Space 2063, which is, I guess, how it's known in a good portion of the world, and I'm so moved by that, like I'm. You're saying that's like, oh yeah, like, you do these genre shows and like, and nerds, like if you're lucky, you get to perform for nerds because we really are interested in what is going on, like interested in the world, interested in, trying to understand it or going along for the ride, and that, and forgiving our failures and getting back on the ride, and trying to help us with some ideas or corrections with things that you might have, I don't know if you know that you're using the wrong gun in that scene, things like that. But it's like,
pilots don't go on the ground and shoot guns.
God, that was, I think if anything was going to cause Glenn to have an aneurysm, it would be that particular criticism, but people care enough to say stuff like that. So, it is sort of exasperating and crazy sometimes, but the more once or you learn to think like, I'm going to just pretend that we're going to keep being able to work, because I think there's so much stress. It's like, look, don't you know, we don't know if we might get canceled next week, or don't you know, we're trying to do a million different things here. And that's the last thing that we're trying to worry about right now. If you can somehow be like, you know what, I'm going to pretend like there's 10 seasons of this, then you just appreciate the fact that people care so much. You know what I mean? Like stumbling across like yumyumpod, it's like, when I know how many episodes there were, and I know now how it turns out. And I know, that it's 30 years later, and I thank goodness I still have a career. You know what I mean? So I have distance from the show, so I can watch it and appreciate all the things that you have to say in a way that sometimes you can't when you're standing, you're in your 16th hour of work, someone's throwing dirt in your face, and like, so-and-so won't come out of their trailer, and you got like, 3 more hours to shoot. You know what I mean? It's like, it's a whole different kind of pressure when that happens.
Well, that's the thing too, like with this current age now, anyone can look back and analyze and review and write stuff and go over things with a fine-tooth comb, and like, we are just people. We have microphones, and we have the DVD box set of this show, and I was like, let's just do this. and
You did go out of your way to get those DVDs, though.
I wanted the commentary tracks. I needed to hear Fox get shit on, and I got what I wanted.
Yeah.
Oh boy!
Well, now I look
They don't
forward
make
to
commentary tracks like that anymore.
I get to listen to them now because Ryan wouldn't let me listen to them in case they had spoilers.
Which they did.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like literally in the first commentary track, they're like, "Oh yeah, so we killed Joel." Stuff like that. But
can you imagine that's how I found out? Like on the commentary track. Wait, what?
But like, you know, as an actor, these aren't necessarily things you may think about. Like back in the day, like you get reviews probably in the paper or wherever they would write up reviews. And from what I understand, there was a bit of a relationship with fans like online at the time with Space.
Yeah, there was. We had our AOL accounts. We had modems in our little dressing rooms. But yeah, we met. There's one in particular. One group in particular. There was a young man who was waiting for a heart transplant named Mark, and the person who was sort of helping him, who was a heart transplant survivor, was a woman named Victoria, and she basically. They watched the show together. She was savvy online and sort of got us got in contact with us about Mark, and it just started this relationship. Like I'm still in touch. I have been in touch with Victoria over the years. We sent Mark some stuff. Unfortunately he did not survive. Like while we were shooting, like all that happened. But it brought this community pretty close. But yeah, like that was like the very beginning, or the beginnings of sort of widespread internet use, and that's when Space was happening right then. Like these message boards and stuff. There was there was all this sort of risque fan fiction between Cooper and McQueen.
We also made our fan fiction about that on the show. We also shipped them.
Yeah.
Mainly, we're McQueen and Ross heads.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Ross had the guitar.
Yep.
But I'm losing Rachel. She's already remembering the times that we talked about that.
Yeah, I'm just grateful that you didn't bring that up during the last interview.
Oh, I'm sure James would have been a good sport about all of that.
Oh, yeah, I just don't think I would have managed to recover.
But like, yeah, we just felt like it on our end too. Like, we like talking about the shows we like or are interested in. We love Babylon 5, for instance. That's like one of our favorites. We talked about Star Trek Discovery because we found it frustrating as a series, but we wanted to examine it. And with Space, like, one of the things I found was just there's so little, like, discussion on it, like, outside of just the general stuff of, like, oh, I missed the show, and oh, there's only one season. It's like this overwhelming kind of like sadness to it. And
yeah, it's almost like the fandom focuses in on what there isn't instead of what there is.
And we wanted to do the podcast to like go through each episode and like how are the episode, like how's the show itself, rather than just looking at it as just this thing in the past and this like what could have been. And I found it very like exhilarating to do that. It's probably been our favorite show that we've had to do on the podcast because of that, because there was so much stuff that's still relevant to today. There's some interesting artifacts of the time period, like, could it be ESP? But could she have ESP? But
poor chaps.
But yeah, I just, for yourself, like, you've been a big supporter of the podcast, and we thank you so much for that. Like, we tagged a couple of the actors here and there along the way, but we weren't too sure like how people would fare with it, because this is like something you worked on decades ago, and it could be a case of like, why would people want to be
but
tinkering and looking at all the bits of it now?
It seems to be that everybody who we have been in contact with, like, Space really has a special place in their hearts, and they're really excited that other people are still excited about it.
I think that anytime someone is thoughtful about something that you put a lot of hard work into, at the very least, you have to respect you have to respect the time that they're putting into it. Like it's just really nice to have your work considered, because there's no guarantee, there's no, I mean, Space is a 1-season situation, and already that's in the minority of shows. So few pilots, so few scripts become pilots, so few pilots become series, so few series run a whole season. So already it's like when you get to a situation like that, it's like you're already talking about, it's a rare circumstance. We sort of have this theory that if we had, for example, gotten the slot that was promised us, like to lead into the X-Files, like if we weren't like a Sunday 7:00 show, or if we had survived that first season, the show would have run many seasons. It was just at the beginning of things, of people becoming interested in science fiction on a sort of a wide screen and on a wide on a wider level. And I think that if we'd gone past that first season, we would have run maybe many seasons, certainly a few, I think.
Because it is an interesting series to look at in the landscape of science fiction TV. You weren't doing, this series was not doing the Star Trek thing. It wasn't doing the Babylon 5 thing. This is a war show. This is gritty. The color palette of the show is like murky browns and grays. The ship is not like this wonderful little ship that you live in. It's like a tin can, like a submarine. Yeah. And then the character types, like Vanson being like the badass marine lady, but she's still feminine and she's like kicking ass and taking names, but also she has loves and losses. And then years later, that type of science fiction television was seen as like, oh, refreshing. Like Star Trek Enterprise tried to do it. Battlestar Galactica successfully did it. And now we live in the age where like that's so many shows. It's like we have these dark, gritty, contemplative shows. Like with Space Above and Beyond, there's a lot of action, but the thing that really is the gold of the series is just characters having their almost like soliloquies about what the situation is of war or loss or family or faith in your character's case. Like that's one of my favorite things about Wang was the River of Stars, like the exploration of faith or the loss of faith. And it doesn't mean just religious. It doesn't mean just believing in God or Jesus, but it's about believing in something in his case.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said.
So with all of that being said, like as a performer in the show, what was the big message or the point of Space for you?
It was great to get to work on a character for a long time, and not just, even if you were lucky enough to do a play that had a long run, you basically rehearse it and then you're performing a finished product for a long time. And it can grow in that performance and you find ways to grow it, but basically you're performing the same written piece and sort of a completed show again and again and again. This was something where the process went on from the beginning to the very end. Like at the very end, we were still trying to figure things out and trying to flesh things out. And I prefer it now, like decades later. Like I think if like long form television is a great creative way to work because you can be less precious about the work. You can be and more adventurous and experimental if you can find your spots, because the characters are going to grow and change, and mistakes are okay because people make mistakes. Characters make mistakes, and that's the lesson from Wang too, is that you can try something for a while and then you can try something totally different and it can still be the same person. In fact, what you think doesn't make sense will teach you more about who the character is than you understand now, because of the fact that he does these things. He's more than you thought he was or she was.
Well, that's pretty much all we've got in terms of the questions when it is all in relation to space. The last major thing we have to ask you is...
No, sorry. I do want to interrupt.
You can, I'll allow it.
Yeah, I'm just curious if you still have any props that you pinched from the set.
Oh, yeah. Did you steal anything?
I had a lot of stuff. About a year maybe a year or two ago, but during the pandemic, maybe. Like I went through and I found all kinds of stuff. Like I had 2 jackets with all the patches on them, and I had scripts, and I had dog tags, and I had a 58th watch, like a lot of the props and stuff. And I gave them to fans online, like basically just asked people to share memories of the show, and sent them stuff. I think I still do have a pair of dog tags. I might have a watch still. I might have like a hammerhead pin. Like we had lots of stuff, because if it wasn't even just directly from the show, like we'd get little things made or sent to us. Like it was, because when people like the show, they really like it. So, you get sent things all the time, or props, like has an extra this or that lying around. And there were a million things on the Saratoga, but I really love those dog tags, because and it places you. I also had, I had the little, tombstone plaque that, when we think that the 58th has been killed and stay with the dead, and then they have the funeral, like I had my little, thing, and I think I gave that away too.
Oh, wow. So cool. Yeah, it's always great because, this is a show where I imagine they would want to keep some of these to reuse them in other things. Like I still see some of the Chig outfits float around in different productions and things from time to time. Wow. Because did I tell you that like just after Space was canceled, I was guest starring on this firefighter show called Fire Company 132, and they were using our sets to burn stuff, like for the big flames and stuff. So I saw like they were just throwing the Saratoga onto this thing and burning it and like shooting. It was really depressing. It is, because it's such an amazing set.
Yeah. It's like you're wasting it.
It's such an elaborate.
I mean, even just like the hammerheads dropping down, that whole sequence, it's so cool. I mean,
yeah.
I just, and just the Chig ships were so cool.
Yeah, well, that's a great thing too. Like, there's a lot of like practical reasons that things the way they were, but then they just tie into themes. Like, oh, you can't just have the hangar bay full of actual hammerheads in there. So obviously, you're just gonna have the thing lower down. But it's like, oh, it works because it's like they're getting into coffins each time, and it goes with the sense of death that's looming over every episode. But that's all we have to ask about Space. Is there anything else you would like to say about it all, or is there anything else you want to mention?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'd like to give my review of the podcast. I'd say your podcast gets a yum yum from me.
Thank you.
It's such a great gift. I mean, it's, you guys are really astute and thoughtful and so smart and considerate about the show. It's been deeply appreciated by me, and I think the other people that worked on the show for a long time. It's very meaningful and gratifying to hear stuff that you worked on. Find an audience that is receptive, and so we really appreciate that kindness. And by kindness, I also mean your honesty about it too. Like, it's not just it's your support, but also your loving criticism about it as well. Like it really helps, because one of the big differences between film and television is that, one of the big differences between film and television and theater is that in theater you get you need your audience, and then you get the response right away. You put energy out there, and it comes back in a laugh, or comes back in a tension-filled pause, and there's applause. And in TV, often you're just putting things out there, and it's like a great void. You never hear anything back, and the world is a little different now with social media and everything else, but there's nothing quite like the return of having a dialogue with people, and I just think that it's anything any artist really appreciates, is to have a meaningful dialogue about their work. It's how you can get better. It's a different way to sort of learn and grow from it. And so people often pretend that they don't pay attention to the audience, but really the audience is the most important part of what we do. So thank you for being such a great audience.
Very moving. We tried. I was so just wanting to revisit the show and see how it would stack up as an adult, as someone with more of a critical lens, and like,
and also
I like to
force me to get past the pilot.
Get past that pilot. I've got with our podcast, we're very much like, we like, it's easy to criticize, be like, oh, this is why I don't like a thing, but we also like to talk about like what do we like, and what about the writing or the production or the actors, like,
this work?
Yeah, how and why does it work? It's easy just to say like, oh, the acting's real good, but it's like, what are the examples of that? Like, what are the little nuances, and are we right or are we wrong? Like when we were talking to James, he was surprised. It's like we thought, oh, James immediately got the characters. Like, oh, I didn't know for ages. I'm like, but he comes in with such a confidence and stuff like that. But and same for you. Like we would talk about that too, where it's just like we feel like this actor has so much to give, but the series hasn't been able to get there yet. And then in the back half, it really does. It really, like, we didn't care for Pearly as an episode, but we loved all of the stuff for you to do in it, like all of the material to do. And there's things like that. But do you have any projects or shows or movies or anything coming up?
I'm working on this show called The Walking Dead, Daryl Dixon. I appear in the last episode of the first season, which is aired already, and then I'm in the second season, which is what we've just finished. And that's been a great process because I'm working with a lot of people. I'm working with several people that I've worked with before. The showrunner of that show I went to acting school with, and two of the directors. Two of them I've worked on both of them with Man in the High Castle, and one of them for many years. And so it's just been fun to sort of collaborate in a way with colleagues that I've known for a long time. And then I have this independent film that I did that's sort of doing the circuit right now called Ramona at Midlife, which is by a wonderful filmmaker / playwright named Brooke Berman. And so hopefully that'll have a nice little audience. And then just trying to find life post-strike. You know, now that the strike is over and work is picking up again, I'm hoping to sort of have an opportunity to work on something new and find some interesting people.
Very nice, because when we were chatting away during the podcast, I was like looking up, what's Joel up to these days? I'm like, I know this show. I know this show. Oh, I didn't even recognize you did a voice in this Superman show that I watched a couple of episodes.
Oh yeah, that was fun. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, but you've been busy, you've been active, and you've still got stuff up. When we were first interacting, you were like, "Oh, I'm in France." I'm like, "Oh, yeah, life of person traveling around," and then it's like, "Oh, you're working on the Walking Dead France show. Oh, I know about this." And now we get advertisements for that on buses and all that down here. It's like, look, it's Daryl. But
right. Okay, cool.
Yeah, because Walking Dead's a big thing. It's been around for a very long time. But that's cool. And are you like you appear at the end of the show? Can you tell us a little bit about what you are in the Walking Dead show?
Sure. I can talk a little bit about what happens at the end of season 1 because it's on the air. But, basically, the series follows Daryl Dixon, played by Norman Reedus, and how he somehow ends up in France. And so the apocalypse has happened there as well. He's trying to figure out what this new world is, how it's the same and how it's different. And then he ends up with some people and he's trying to help them find their way to a place called the Nest, which is a spiritual enclave of people who are trying to embrace the higher aspects of humanity while so much of it has been just about base survival and death. And so it's sort of this amalgamation of all these religions have come together, and it's led by this character named Losang, and who is an Asian American Buddhist from New Jersey who got stuck in Paris during the zombie apocalypse. Although the word zombie does not exist in this universe, the Walker apocalypse, I guess I should say. And so he's an American who speaks French and is trying to sort of lead the world to a spiritual transformation. And that's the character that I play.
Sounds like you're a nice guy. I get positive vibes from the man of a cult, sounds like. I don't know. We'll have to find out and see where you go.
Well, you have to watch and see. like all people, he is not perfect. Let's
Yes.
just put it that way.
Walking Dead does love our main characters go to what is a seemingly nice place with a weird setup, and then it's like, well, we have to try and be friends with these people, or not. We'll have to see.
Yeah, beware the nice people, right? Beware the
Yes.
nice people in a post-apocalyptic world.
Well, I guess that's all we have. I thank you so much for supporting us and coming on and chatting with us. It means the world, and it's been speechless almost about all of this, because we just were sitting in this room and we're just recording our conversations on this and just sending it out to the web, and we knew that the Space Above and Beyond fans would appreciate it, but there was like a little bit of a will the cast and crew listen to this, or will they hear this? Because again, not enough people are really flagging this up in the particular way that we were doing it. But it's just so great to be able to hear the stories of what it was like, because as people who watch shows, you go, I wonder what it was like behind the scenes. I wonder what like the actors think of this. Do they think the same way I do, or do they have a drastically different view on everything? And Rachel, you again, like this was your first time experience. You still haven't got the chance to rewatch it, but do you think it will change drastically now that you have the type of like insight that rarely people get when they go through a rewatch of a show?
Yeah, it will definitely be a unique experience. But I am really looking forward to it.
We will try to like The Enemy on the rewatch.
But one quick thing on The Enemy is that we were so hopped up on caffeine during that show, because there was a coffee truck that started coming right around that time, and they would make these little coffee dollars, and so we would like buy people coffee dollars, and everyone was getting these coffees. They were so good. We felt like such grown-ups having coffees in the middle of the night because we were working all day. And when you watch it, it's like we are so caffeinated, and like you so you so astutely put it, we are just yelling our heads off for 50. Actually, the episode came in way short, so then they had to do the whole framing of it, with it was looking back at it. But we thought like we were like serious actors doing it, like really feeling it, and then so we
there's no audience to bounce off of then.
No.
Yeah, people, we would have looked up and everyone would have had their hands over their ears.
Oh yeah. But
but I do want to defend Marilyn Osborne, who's the writer on that episode, is a wonderful writer, and she wrote The River Stars, and she wrote, I believe, Toy Soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe Stay with the Dead. I'm not sure about that, but she was a wonderful writer and a great person to talk to about the scripts, and she had a deep affection for the characters on the show, and gave Wang a lot of wonderful things to do too, like River of Stars. So,
oh yeah, there was a great amount of writers that came into the show that were already involved and got their episodes to do. I still can't wait to find out who Doc Johnson is, who wrote Choice or Chance. That's like a mystery person. I'm like, I don't know who that is.
Yeah, there's it's interesting because there's a lot of folks. There's a few writers at the beginning who have not their real names on the episode. It's you should ask if you ever speak to Glenn and Jim, you should ask them about that.
Oh yeah, that's what we assume. Doc Johnson sounds like an alias. It sounds like for union reasons. Right. I'm not allowed to put my name down for this one, so I'm going to put it down for this or whatever.
Yeah.
Or,
do you know Alan Smithy?
Yeah, the Alan Smithy approach.
So, yeah, it's like Alan Smithy. Yeah.
Oh, but the Choice of Chance is so good.
You just want to have somebody
agree.
directly to thank, don't you, Ryan?
Well, they did give us El Royale on that episode, so it's a weird thing. But everyone out there listening and or watching this, you can find us on social medias, on all of the podcast hosting sites, yumyumpod. If you want to support the podcast, just head on over to our Patreon, where we upload some of this content over there first, as well as we have a plethora of bonus stuff that doesn't make it all the way to the main feed, as well as a little group Discord where we have a community of people that chat along. We have some people who are just now starting to watch Space Above and Beyond, and we got a message dropped in there of Jesus was an in vitro, which made me have a good chuckle. So you get to have some of those hijinks when you come on over, but make sure to like and share this around the place. Check out Joel. He's on social media too. I love following your stuff, your little updates on things, your little behind the scenes photos, your memories of working on previous productions and stuff. Like, oh look, here's a photo of you with like the kid version of this character from The Man in the High Castle, or things like that. And I must admit, like, it was such a weird moment of you shared one of our posts and there's like all of these actors I love and respect just commenting on the post like, hey, it's Daniel Day Kim, one of my favorite actors. Daniel Day Kim's just dropping in. I'm like, of course Daniel Day Kim and Joel know each other. Of course, why not? It's just one of those things.
We went to acting school together.
Yeah. And again, both of you early on, Sci-Fi shows that got cancelled because he was in
indeed.
Crusade. Which is the Babylon 5 spin-off. So with Gary Cole and Ray Butts, Steve, he was in American Gothic, the cancelled show with Gary Cole. I don't know what it is about Gary Cole and cancelled shows in the 90s. But thank you all so much for listening. And until next time, remember to
R.I.P. Pags.
To give a toast to Pags. We need to interview Pags, actually. we should sit down with him. He's an Australian talent, so I think we could get him. Let's bring him over. Find out what Pags
Get
is
him
up
in.
to.
I'll tune in.